Today I'm in North Cornwall and I've come to the village of St Columb Major, and I'm going to visit the parish church. I'll look around the graveyard and then we'll move on to a little distance away where the newer cemetery is. We walk up the path between the row of yew trees, traditional trees in graveyards. We can see there are a few stones remaining in the churchyard, but obviously very many have been cleared to make maintenance much easier. Let's wander across and have a look at the large table tomb. Well, there is an inscription on the side there, but I'm not really making out the name very clearly. On the ground, this flat stone mentions William Hockner, but the date is a little bit obscured. Then we move on to another very large piece of stone. Another table tomb over here, but like so many of the table tombs with the inscription on the top face, they don't wear very well. And this one, in fact, looks as though it probably never had an inscription on the top face. One down here, bit of an angle. Sacred. Church bells striking 1:15. And the wife of James Barry. But again, I'm not making out a date very clearly. Around the back of the church we see a very similar situation. Most of the stones have been removed. We have a number of large table tombs, which is indicative of the wealth that was in this area at one time. But as I mentioned before, the inscriptions are very hard to make out on the top faces. This one here is badly cracked. Not easy to see that one. And we'll carry on around the outside of the church before we go inside and have a look at the memorials there. I'm quite surprised by the number of large table tombs there are here. There's one here, we can see the name is Hope, and underneath Margaret. Quite decorative on this one. In memory of Richard Treyer, October 1816, so it's a 200-year-old stone. He was aged 55 years. I'm looking beyond the graveyard. There's some lovely stone buildings behind. They'll be dating back a couple of 100 years. Let's pop along here. There's a very large tomb over the back. Probably the largest in the cemetery, in the graveyard. Let's have a look at that one. And despite its size, the inscription on the sides are not easy to read. The surname may be Hambrook. Well, that's quite a sizable construction. Let's move along and see if we can read any of the others. This is Jonathan Higgs, possibly. You see in the distance the War Memorial. We'll get to that shortly. It's being redecorated at the moment. This is to the memory of John, the son of Samuel and Mary Coad. He was aged 6 months, and I think it's 1840. And at one end of the churchyard is the War Memorial. So many names on here. A brief count tells me there's around 60 names. Very large number from a small parish like this. This one took my eye because it's a metal plaque mounted onto the stone. The inscription is James, the elder son of James, and it looks like Bitut Ching, who died in 1845, aged 7 years and 9 months. Well, the church here is 14th century. Obviously some additions and changes. You can see the style of the architecture changing from the square on the porch to the more angular design on the right hand side, and the very almost brutal design of the tower. But the basic church dates back to the 14th century, and most of them were built on sites of previous chapels and churches, so probably worship has been here for even longer than that. Now the church is open, but I think there are people inside, so I may have to keep the commentary to a minimum. Let's have a look. On the wall at the rear is a memorial plaque to members of 2 crews of 42 Squadron Royal Air Force, and it lists the names there of around 19 crew members who died on a flight over the Atlantic in 1955. Some of the ends on the pews date back many hundreds of years with intricate carvings. See here with a face and a heart. One here, very elaborately carved. Here we have a man playing an instrument, and it looks like a dancing dog. This one with the 2 birds. Elaborate initials on this one. And this one, there's a cross, but it's made to look like a T and an X. There's some tools here with a anvil. These are absolutely fascinating. Appear to be a pair of feet on the left-hand one. Maybe a bit missing at the top of that. Come across here, there are some more tools. There looks like a fret saw and some pointers and possibly a spanner at the top. And here we have a bird mounted on a perch of some sort. And the same on this one. And here we have more tools. Tools we'd recognise even today. Looks like a a camel on this one with the hump on the back, and a man on the right hand panel. Absolutely fascinating, but we're having to crouch down to see these and light it up with my torch. Not easy to see under normal circumstances. And here we have some dancing animals, all dating back 400 or 500 years. Here we got 2 shovels on the left hand side. I'm not quite sure what's on the right. This is just an elaborate W. 2 swans. Two more birds facing away from each other. Remarkable the way these have been preserved, because they're in wood and not obviously in stone. And more tools. Well, whereas the graveyard here is a little disappointing, the inside of the church, with the decorated pew ends, the wooden carvings dating back many centuries, are absolutely fascinating. It did really need a lot more time. You have to crouch down almost at floor level to see them and illuminate them. But some very interesting designs there of early tools. I'm going to pop outside now into the main street and just show you a couple of interesting buildings here in St Columb Major before we drive down to the cemetery and have a look around that. Outside the entrance of the churchyard are these 2 very old cottages, probably dating back many centuries, but still being in use. This one is the library building. The date at the top there is 1848, still being used as the library. Some more old cottages, and a house directly in front with the very unusual arches over the windows. The building directly in front is the St Columb Liberal Club, and then immediately to the left, the taller white building. On the top it reads the Conservative Club. This is where the political parties met. Now this one retains the name Bank House, but I was interested to see the very clever brickwork they've done, particularly over the windows with the different colour stone, and then the banding in red, and above that the broad band, and then the colourful bands right the way up to the top. A lot of careful thought has gone into this to make it a very well decorated building. And this one opposite is named Bond's House, so possibly it's something to do with bonded warehousing, maybe. The date is 1874, but an impressive building for a small town. And a quaint little building, restaurant, free house, the Ring of Bells, dating back several centuries. Well, I've driven half a mile to the main cemetery in St Columb Major. And as you go through the gates, you see the 2 chapels of rest. Originally one for the nonconformists and one for the C of E. Let's wander on up and see some of the memorials. I pan to the left, quite a lot of clearance done, grass kept very low, quite a reasonable size cemetery. Let's come back round the other way. And again, large areas of open grass space where there would have been numerous memorials, but for the convenience they've been cleared away. I've walked through the cemetery to the far end, as all the memorials are facing this way. So we'll start by working our way back towards the entrance. But what I immediately see up here at this end is a large number of CWGC war memorials. Now I know that this area had several RAF bases during the Second War, so I'm suspecting we're going to see a number to the men who died in the RAF. And the first one is interesting. It's got the Star of David on it. Navigator, Royal Canadian Air Force, 1943, age 22. Royal Canadian Air Force, 1942. And then next to them is one to a German, presumably a pilot or similar, probably shot down over here, Otto Buhr. Then Douglas, an air gunner in the RAF. Flight Sergeant Fleming, again the Royal Canadian Air Force. So many Canadians came over here and gave their lives. Now presumably because they're here, they died here and therefore presumably came back badly shot up rather than ditched in the sea or over the war zone. These are men that made it back but died in North Cornwall. An airman of the 39-45 war, name not known. That's so sad. Now, there are so many of these along here. Royal Australian Air Force, 1942. Royal Marines. Pilot in the Royal Air Force. A pilot in the Royal Air Force. Auxiliary Air Force. Wireless operator, Canadian. An Australian. Another Canadian. We're so grateful for these guys that came back to this country, or came to this country, to help us in that Second World War. Royal Air Force, Royal Air Force, Royal Canadian Air Force. And let me move into the row behind. I guess we're seeing about 60 names from the Air Force. Now there's an unusual one. M. Sayer from the Women's Auxiliary Air Force. Now I may be wrong here, but I believe the female pilots were used to deliver planes to the pilots who actually went into battle. Equally valuable service. Lloyd, Royal Air Force. Another Canadian. Royal Air Force. Canadian. Canadian. Australian. Royal Canadian. And underneath it someone's put this plaque, but it's very weathered now Without picking it up and moving it, I'm not able to make out the inscription on there. Another Australian, Royal Air Force, Royal Canadian Air Force. Another Canadian. What I have seen in other cemeteries is that a number of these Canadians were actually Americans from the US of A who joined up, went to Canada and joined up and became part of the Canadian Air Force. Well, that is a very moving memorial to all the airmen, or many of the airmen, who died in this area from the Second World War. Now up at the far end we have all the latest memorials. You can see a lot more colour and variation, different colour stones, different colour lettering, and of course because they're so new, much easier to read. Looking here at 2017, now moving back presumably in time. That one there, barrel Papin, looks very clear. It's 2007, but underneath is 2017. We got the musical sign, the treble clef for Anthony Dennis Osborne, and the bottom right hand side a handbell, and it says, "When words fail, music speaks." And here we have with the wings on the top, we've got Frederick Henry Quatermain Weaver, 1924 to 2000. Right, we'll move through or past the graves of the airmen, and I'll work my way back through the cemetery. A couple of graves here with coloured images. It's amazing what they can do with technology now. Frederick John Kellaway. It's got the scene of a river and the mountain hills. Over here, this one looks a little bit surreal, but obviously it's sailing dinghies. Very close to the sea here, little more than 2 or 3 miles away at Newquay. We can work our way back through these stones, back in time. Over there again you can see the 2 chapels that we saw as we came in. And I'm seeing a WGC headstone directly in front of me. So this is additional to all the airmen we've seen. This is Peter Mittell, Royal Naval Volunteer Reserve, 1941. The family have added at the bottom, Pilot Fleet Air Arm, and he shall be my son, also his parents, Brenchley and Muriel. So he was a pilot as well, a pilot in the Fleet Air Arm. And then we move back to older stones with the curbs round them. This one's 1950 for Emma Jane Hawkey. Let me head over this way. The recent stones are not as tall as the old ones, but that's down to the regulations of the cemetery. They're quite strict now with the maximum height you can have, and width you can have, and even thickness of stone, I read the other day. Rules vary between cemeteries, of course, but it's very much more regulated than it would have been in the Victorian era, when we have these magnificent memorials. Now there's a very large white one down here, caught my eye as I walked in. This side it says John Charles Teagle of Trevithick and Fred Teagle. That's very well maintained, very well kept. On this end is another Fred Teagle, so this is the Teagle tomb. Well, I'm going to pause there, finish there. It's difficult to follow up from seeing all those airmen, and particularly those that came from abroad, the Australians and the Canadians, and gave their lives in the Second War. And it's very likely that very few of their family from those countries have ever been here to see the final resting place of their sons. It's very moving, something well worth coming if you're in North Cornwall, anywhere near Newquay. Come to see cemetery at St Columb Major. In the meantime, I hope you found it interesting, and till the next time.